Hi everybody! Welcome to Sunday Afternoon Book Club. So today we are going to wrap up our time with Pride and Prejudice. So we are going to jump right into the book on the third part of it, and this is called Elizabeth Rejects the Rector. "I hope, my dear," said Mr. Bennet to his wife, "that you have ordered a good dinner today, because I have reason to expect an addition to our family party. My cousin, Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases." "Oh, my dear," cried his wife, "pray do not talk of that odious man." Mrs. Bennet continued to rail bitterly against the cruelty of settling an estate away from a family of 5 daughters in favor of a man whom nobody cared anything about. Thus the Reverend Mr. Collins of Hunsford, the heir presumptive to Longbourn, came to visit the Bennets. He was a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25. His air was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. He was a strange mixture of pomposity, servility, and self-importance, a creature most abjectly and yet most amusingly devoid of anything like tact, taste, or humor. Being ready to make the Bennet girls every possible amends for the unwilling injury he must eventually do them, he thought first of all offering himself to Jane. But hearing that her affections were pre-engaged, he had only to change from Jane to Elizabeth. It was soon done while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire. His proposal he made to the younger lady in a long set speech, in which he explained first of all his general reasons for marrying, and then his reasons for directing his matrimonial views to Longbourn, and finally assuring her that on the subject of the small portion she would bring him no ungenerous reproach should ever pass his lips when they were married. It was absolutely necessary to interrupt him then, so Elizabeth told him that he was being way too hasty, thanked him for his proposals, and then declined them. "I am not now to learn," replied Mr. Collins, with a formal wave of his hand, "that it is usual for young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept, when he first applies for their favor, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just told me, and shall hope to lead you down the altar in not too long of time." "Upon my word, sir," cried Elizabeth, "your hope is rather an extraordinary one after my declaration. I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies who are so daring as to risk their happiness on the chance of being asked a second time. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world that you could make happy. Nay, were your patron, Lady Catherine, to know me, I am persuaded she would find me in every respect ill qualified for the situation," said Mr. Collins very gravely. "I cannot imagine that her ladyship would at all disapprove of you. And you may be certain that when I have the honor of seeing her again, I shall speak in the highest terms of your modesty, economy, and other amiable qualifications." Twice more was Mr. Collins refused, and even then he would not take no for an answer. "You must give me leave to flatter myself, my dear cousin," said he, "that your refusals of my addresses are merely words, of course. My reasons for believing it are chiefly these. It does not appear to me that my hand is unworthy of your acceptance, or that the establishment I can offer would be any other than highly desirable. In my situation in life, my connections with the family of De Bourgh, and my relationship to your own, are circumstances highly in my favor. And you should take it into further consideration that, in spite of your manifold attractions, it is by no means certain that another offer of marriage will ever be made to you. Your portion is unhappily so small that it will, in all likelihood, undo the effects of your loveliness and amiable qualifications. I must, therefore, conclude that you are nothing serious in your rejection of me. I shall choose to attribute it to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females. I do assure you, sir, said Elizabeth, that I have no pretensions whatever to that kind of elegance which consists of tormenting a respectable man. I would rather be paid to compliment of being believed sincere. I thank you again and again for the honor that you have done me in your proposals, but I accept them as absolutely impossible. My feelings in every respect forbid it. Can I speak plainer? Do you not consider me now as an elegant female intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart? You are uniformly charming, said he, with an air of awkward gallantry, and I am persuaded that, when sanctioned by the express authority of both your excellent parents, my proposals will be acceptable. What a great guy, isn't he? All right, we are on to chapter 4. Darcy loves and loses. Rejected by Elizabeth, to the great satisfaction of her father and the great indignation of her mother, the rector of Hunsford lost no time in betaking himself to Elizabeth's friend Charlotte Lucas, who, being a girl with unromantic, not to say prosaic views of marriage, readily accepted and married him, thereby moving further disgust and anger poor Mrs. Bennet, who is already wondering and repining at Mr. Bingley's returning no more into Hertfordshire. Jane suffered in silence, and despite Elizabeth's efforts to point out the duplicity of Caroline Bingley, was inclined to believe the protestations that the latter made in her letters from London of Bingley's growing attachment to the Darcy sister, Georgiana. Mr. Bennet treated the matter in his customary ironical way. "So, Lizzie," said he, "your sister is crossed and loved, I find. I congratulate her. Next to being married, a girl likes to be crossed in love a little now and then. It is something to think of, and gives her sort of a distinction among her companions. Now, when is your turn to come? You will hardly bear to be long outdone by Jane. Now is your time. Here are officers enough at Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man. He is a pleasant enough fellow, and will jilt your credibility. Thank you, sir, but a less agreeable man would satisfy me. We must not all expect Jane's good fortune." "True," said Mr. Bennet, "but it is a comfort to think that, whatever that kind may befall you, you have a mother who will always make the most of it." As it turned out, Wickham, though he had not arrived at an intimacy which enabled him to jilt Elizabeth, yet most certainly transferred his attentions very shortly from her to a Miss King, who, by the death of her grandfather, had come into £10,000. Elizabeth, however, was quite heart-whole, and she and her former admirer parted on friendly terms when she left Longbourn to pay her promised visit to Mr. and Mrs. Collins at Hunsford. There she found Charlotte, managing her home and her lady was with considerable discretion, and the rectory adjoined Rosings Park, the seat of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the patroness of the living. She was introduced to that lady, in whom she could discover nothing but an insolent, aristocratic woman, who dictated to everyone about her, meddled in everybody's business, and aimed at marrying her sickly daughter to Darcy, and was, needless to say, slavishly adored by Mr. Collins. In the third week of her visit, Mr. Darcy and his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, came down to see their aunt, and thus, to Elizabeth's indifference, an acquaintance was renewed, which Darcy soon seemed to show a real desire to take up again. He sought her society at Rosings Park. He called familiarly at the rectory. He waylaid her in her favorite walk, and all the time, in all of his intercourse with her, he revealed such a mixture of interest and constraint, as demonstrated only too clearly that some internal struggle was going on within him. Mrs. Collins began to hope for her friend, but Elizabeth, who had received from Colonel Fitzwilliam ample confirmation of her suspicion that it was Darcy who had persuaded Bingley to give up Jane, was now only more incensed against the man who had broken her sister's peace of mind. On the very evening of the next day, which she had extracted this piece of information from his cousin, Darcy, knowing her to be alone at the rectory, and after a silence of several minutes, came towards her in an agitated manner. On the very evening of the day, "In the vein I have struggled," he said, "it will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, colored, doubted, and was silent. This he considered sufficient encouragement, and the avowal of all that he felt and had long felt for her immediately followed. He spoke well, but there were feelings besides those of the heart to be detailed. His sense of her inferiority, of marriage with her being a degradation, of the family obstacles which judgment had always opposed to inclination, were dwelt on a warmth which seemed due to the consequence he was wounding, but was very unlikely to recommend his suit. In truth, it was already he lost, for though Elizabeth could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection, her intentions did not vary for an instant. Accusing him of having ruined, perhaps forever, the happiness of her sister Jane, and having blighted the career of his former friend Wickham, she approached him with the uncivil style of his declaration, and gave him her answer in these words: "You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it." That's kind of harsh. Soon after, Darcy took his leave, but the next day he accosted Elizabeth in the park and handed her a letter, which he begged her to read. She read it, and had the mortification to discover not only had Darcy made some scathing but perfectly justifiable comments on the objectionable members of her family, but was able to clear himself of both the charges that she had brought against him. When Elizabeth returned to Longbourn, she found it all a relief to tell Jane of Darcy's proposal, and, persuaded she would find in every respect ill qualified for the situation. Some 2 months later, Elizabeth went on a tour in Derbyshire with her maternal uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. The latter had lived for some years in a town called Lambton, and wished to revisit her old friends there, as in Pemberley, Mr. Darcy's seat was only 5 miles off, and was a show place. The Gardiners had determined to see it, though the niece was reluctant to accompany them until she had learned that its owner was not at home. As they were being shown over the place, Elizabeth could not help reflecting that she has been a mistress of it, and she listened with surprise as the old housekeeper told them that she should never meet with a better master, that she had never had a cross word from him in her life, and that as a child he was always the sweetest-tempered, most generous-hearted boy in the world, and that there was not one of the tenants or servants that would justify to his excellent qualities as landlord and master. As they were walking across the lawn over to the Pemberley himself, suddenly came forward from the road, and as if to justify the praises of his housekeeper, and to show that he had taken it to heart Elizabeth's former complaints of his behavior, proceeded to treat the Gardner party with the greatest civility and even cordiality. He introduced his sister to them, asked them to dinner, invited Mr. Gardner to fish at Pemberley, and in answer to a spiteful remark of Miss Bingley's to the effect that he had thought Elizabeth pretty at one time, he made the crushing reply, "Yes, but that was only when I first knew her, for it has been many months since I had considered her as one of the handsomest women in my acquaintance." But just when Elizabeth's growing esteem and gratitude might have deepened into affection for Darcy, circumstances were communicated to her in a letter from Jane, which seemed to render it in highest degree improbable that so proud and fastidious a man as he would ever make any further advances. Darcy seemed to be staggered when he heard the news, and instantly returned to the Gardner party of Longbourn. They found on their arrival that Mr. Bennet was searching for his daughter in London, when Mr. Gardner agreed to go consult him. And the next chapter is called The Three Bennet Weddings. After arrangements had been made for Wickham's entering the regulars and joining a regiment at Newcastle, his marriage with Lydia took place, and the young couple were received at Longbourn. Their assurance was quite reassuring. "Well, Mamma," said Lydia, "what do you think of my husband? Is he not a charming man? I am sure that all my sisters will envy me. I only hope that they may have half as good as my luck. They all must go to Brighton. That is the place to get husbands nowadays. What a pity it is, Mamma, that we did not all go." "Very true. And if it had been in my way, we should have. But my dear Lydia, I don't like at all your going such a way off. Must it be so?" "Oh, Lord, yes." "There is nothing in that. I shall like it of all things. You and Papa and sisters must come down to see us. We shall be at Newcastle all the winter, and I dare say there will be some balls, and I will take care to get good partners for them all. I should like that beyond anything. And then, when your husbands go away, you may leave one or two of the sisters behind you, and I dare say I shall get husbands for them before our winter tour is over." "I thank you for my share of the favor," said Elizabeth, "but I do not particularly like your way of getting husbands." All right, and that is actually the end of the book. So I hope you guys enjoyed Pride and Prejudice, and I will see you all very soon. Have a good day.